All right, so new sermon series time. I encourage you to read along with the series with us. We're in the first two chapters of Judges right now, and first two chapters. If you're like, "What? How far am I supposed to read?" I've got your answer, right? Like you just go right to our website. There's a heading on the website that looks a lot like all of this logo stuff here. You click on that, and I'll have a weekly list of the readings, and you can kind of read with us and read the story. I have the story kind of like read all around it, and you'll see what's going on there. But I encourage you to do that. You don't have to. But if you want to get some extra stars, you can, oh, I know, right? Like that, you can read for it. But remember, the Lord, in secret, right? Like that's okay. So we're starting Judges. Judges is a fascinating book, and where it sits in the historical timeline of all of this, you have the first 5 books of the Bible. That we call that the Pentateuch. Pentagon, first 5. Good job, right? That's like the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And what those books are about, God created the world and basically created his people. That was like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all that. But then struggle came into all of that as they were put into slavery, as like Egypt put them into slavery and overworked them, and they called out in distress to God of save us. We need you to pull us out of there. And God rips them from Pharaoh's hands, from Egypt's hands, takes them from all that. And then they grumble in the wilderness. And because they kind of grumble and complain and were generally sinful, the whole golden calf thing, they had to wander the wilderness for 40 years. Moses didn't even get to see the land flowing with milk and honey. He got to go on top of a mountain, peer into it. It's there it is, right? He didn't get to do that. And none of the people that were there during the whole golden calf episode were able to go into it either. So you have this completely new generation, and then a new generation of leaders, this guy named Joshua, and Joshua has and he takes them into the promised land, and God tells him to wipe out everybody, all the Canaanites. Now, to us, who are Westerners, U.S. citizens in the year of our Lord 2024, we hear stuff like total annihilation, and we get, ooh, get by it. It'll be all right. Yes, but it is, but you'll be all right. You're all right. Just get by it. Because the point is that they don't do that. Now, Joshua starts off his story with a lot of power. You guys know his big thing that he did. All I have to say is Joshua and the battle of... Good job. Extra 3 stars for each one of you, right? You guys all know that, where they marched around and blew the horns and the walls came tumbling down. Yeah, they did that. And then they continued this conquest of the land of Canaan. And after Joshua dies is when we get to our book, the book of Judges, where we are today. And this book is fascinating. But here's the whole thing with the book, is that it's like a toilet bowl, and it just circles around and goes down and out of the pipes. That's the book of Judges. Am I wrong, Ed? Yeah, that's the book of Judges. It's just this circling around and going down, right? That's what's going on. And if I was to use a movie or a story, what's the best analog for this book of Judges going on here? It would have to be vacation. That's what it is, because that's anyway, and listen, none of you are allowed to watch this movie. It's smut and all that stuff. I can't even imagine a pastor would use this movie as an illustration, but it does it really well. Clark Griswold, Chevy Chase there, all he wants to do is take his family on the great American vacation, to drive from Chicago all the way to Wally World in California. Yeah, that's all that stuff. That's all he wants to do. And everything just falls apart along the way. They end up picking up the aunt. She dies on the trip. It's awful. We rewatched this movie. They put her on top of the car. It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. Like you have the whole thing with the dog strapped to on the leash in the back. Oh, it's sad. And then this happens, right? Like it's just spiraling around as it's going down and gets more and more out of control. But Chevy Chase is like, we will make it, right? We will make it. The Griswold family vacation, and he makes it to Wally World, and they run up to the front of it, and it's closed. And the moose looks at them and goes, sorry, folks, park's closed. Making fun of Mickey a little bit there. And so they go over there, but that's not a good enough answer for him. He has to continue to do what is right in his own eyes. And he goes to a sporting goods store and holds up this nice young John Candy fellow and makes them ride all the rides with him, right? It gets worse and worse and worse and spirals all the way down, right? It's a great movie, but none of you should watch it. None. Right? Yeah, too late. Oh, okay. Watch the TV edit. And anyway, but this is kind of what the book of Judges is all about. It's kind of the same thing. It goes down and down and down and down. And I think the last verse that's in the book of Judges shows what's going on in this book really well. This is it in Judges chapter 21, verse 25. It's the very, hey, I need my control back. like that's, there we go. Judges 21:25. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That's how the book ends. Like that's like cheery, right? You can kind of sense there's some undertones going on there, right? And that's kind of what's going on. So we're going to talk a little bit for a second about what all this looks like and how all of this is written. Judges is very much Hebrew thought, kind of helping you kind of read it now. And Hebrew thought is very cyclical. It's very circular in nature. So when you're reading it, it's like, man, I feel like we've been here before. The Gospel of John is also like this. If you're reading through there, and you're like, man, I feel like I've read this just a little bit ago. It's because that's what you have. When we tell stories, and if I'm telling the story of watching from this end of the stage, for those at home, this end of the camera, right, the camera scene, to that side, I'm just going to walk straight there and tell you about the journey and talk about how I almost tripped right there and all that stuff. But what Hebrew thought is, it's very circular. So it's like as I'm telling the story of going to the other side, we'll come over there and then we'll kind of come back a little bit, and then but not all the way, and we'll keep moving on. And I'll come back. Like that's how it's written as we circulate our way into. That's just how the language works, how they tell stories. That's how Judges work. And the problem is that they're showing these people who have done what is right in their own eyes, and they've become indistinguishable from everyone else around them. Right? That is what has happened. And they become indistinguishable, that they sin and they do whatever is right in their own eyes, and then God raises up another judge to deliver them, and then things kind of get a little bit better, but it's just like this. When I circled back, we don't go all the way back to the beginning, right? We don't go all the way back. It's kind of like circling the bowl, right? Going all the way down, all the way down, all the way down. Let's talk about that term judges for a second. That's really not a good term because, like, in my mind, when I picture a judge, it's like black robes and like with a little gavel, and also like in the 1800s had like white wigs on, right? That's kind of what I picture with judge. It's not a bad word. We were talking about the other day, and the Hebrew Bible calls it chieftains. The chieftains. That's actually a better word, like chief. All of those things. So kind of like when you hear judge in here, think of like a chief, and you kind of get what's going on around here. But this cycle that they're going down looks a lot like this. They start off with peace, and then sin enters into this, and then all of a sudden they become oppressed because of this, and they cry out for repentance, and God delivers them, and then they have a time of peace again. And then sin enters into it, then oppression. You see what's going on. The problem is that it gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then near the end of it, we get to the story of Samson. Oh, Samson. Samson, I love the story of Samson, but it's not for any of the reasons why you think so. And then after Samson, the book is truly heinous and ugly. All right? But there's a lot here, and it's fascinating. And so what I want to do, as we kind of set it up, Judges chapter 1 and 2 actually show us like an overview of how this book is working, right? So the number one thing you got to understand is that it keeps talking about Egypt, all right? It keeps talking about Egypt, how God's people were delivered out of slavery of Egypt, and they have forgotten that, right? And they wandered the desert for 40 years, and now with Joshua and the Battle of Jericho and everything else, they have defeated everyone in it. But the problem is, they didn't defeat everybody. They didn't get rid of all of them. And in fact, they've kind of adopted some of their gods and all these things that have gone forth, and they have forgotten how God has taken them from the land of Egypt. And I want to show you a verse that shows you that they have forgotten this. It's Judges chapter 1, verse 28. When Israel became strong, okay, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor, but never drove them out completely. Okay, there's some English sanitization going on with the text here, and we all can see it. What's another word for forced labor? Exactly. The Old Testament is phenomenally anti-slavery. Phenomenally. The whole sense behind the Old Testament is like they were once slaves, and God took them out of slaves. They know what it's like. Why would you ever be pro-slavery? Like that's the whole gist of the Old Testament. So whenever you see the Old Testament saying that the Hebrews had slaves, it's not like God says, hooray. He's like, they're acting like Egypt. So they get a little bit of taste of power, and they don't want to be God's people anymore. They want to be like Egypt. They want to relish in that power. Look at how amazing I am, right? And they begin intermixing with all the other gods. And we fast forward to chapter 2, and the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt. And they followed and worshiped various gods of the people around them, and they aroused the Lord's anger, right? Like God has been with them, but now they are just going after these other gods. They are indistinguishable from everyone else in this region. God has set them apart to be special, and yet they just look like everything else. And then we fast forward a couple of more verses. It says, then the Lord raised up judges, chieftains, right? Chiefs, who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Yet they would not listen to the judges, but prostituted themselves. That's quite the use of the word, right? They prostituted themselves to other gods and worshiped them. They quickly turned from the ways of the ancestors who had been obedient to the Lord's commands. Yeah, that prostituted language, that's like there's no mixing words there, right? Like you're never using that lightly when you're talking about how people are responding to things, right? Like you're never doing this. Like God has been faithful to them, and yet they've done whatever is right in their own eyes, and they've been completely indistinguishable, right, from the culture around them. And I think we understand this. I think we get it. Like that's, I think we see it all around us. We can even feel it inside of us. We at this point you can be like, oh yeah, those people over there, they're indistinguishable. Those Christians over there, they're indistinguishable from their culture, right? They're just fully into it and all that stuff. But that's not what Judges is calling us to. It's the book isn't showing us what happens to Israel here for us to feel righteous in pointing fingers at other people, but it's getting us to look in the mirror at our own self, right? And we do a lot of things that are just indistinguishable. Like if you've ever been part of a business or something like that, and you're working on it, and you're like, ooh, we could just be a little shady here. Sure, it'll hurt these people a little bit, but they can afford it. Besides, it's just business, right? Taxes are due this week. We all been on the up and up on the little, like, all the stuff, right? Ooh, no one's laughing. Like we've been all in the, like, it's like, oh yeah, we'll talk about it in May. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and the things that are God's the God's. But right now, Larry got away with this crazy deduction last year. I'm going to get away with it right now, right? Like that's yeah, right. So, or we love to complain. It's like, oh my goodness, the youth today. They're being so promiscuous. They're having the sex all over the place, like all of these things, and it's terrible, right? That we can't. They're all of the sins of adultery that they're just so, it's so awful. But we all know that the sin of adultery of before marriage doesn't matter when you're over 65 and Social Security's on the line, right? like that's like, we get so wrapped up in calling other people out that we don't actually look at ourselves too much, and it's all about like self-righteousness and just wanting to justify our own actions. I pick on politics so much for this very reason, because we will get so wrapped up in all of this. I've heard already that this election coming up is the most important election that has ever been, that society will crumble if so-and-so is elected, right? I heard that 4 years ago too. And the 4 years before that. And the 4 years before that, right? Like, it's going over. And the thing is, we would rather be invested in the power of Caesar than and let it affect our relationships with our family members and our friends and our neighbors, right? We'd be more invested in Caesar's power than maintaining those relationships with the people around us. It's doing what is right in our own eyes. And listen, this even happened in Jesus' day. And the problem is by doing that, we become indistinguishable. We're so invested in what's going on with Caesar's life that we can't bring goodness into the world now. Did you guys catch it on Good Friday? Good Friday, we had a verse, and I remember when I was preparing all the verses that were being read and talked about and all that stuff, this one hit me a little harder. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. It's from John's, and it says this, and it's about what we're talking about right now. It says, but they shouted, take him away, crucify, crucify, crucify. We know that. And cheekily, Pilate goes, shall I crucify your king? And then they yell, saying the quiet part out loud, finally, we have no king but Caesar. I read an interesting statistic the other day that 50% of those that claim the evangelical voting bloc don't go to church. And I'm not saying that to like, oh, they're evil out there, but I think that spirit comes into us, and we gotta recognize that we gotta recognize the times when we say, "I've got no king but Caesar," right? Because we can become indistinguishable from the world. We become indistinguishable from this. We're just doing what we want. But the thing is Jesus is very distinguishable. I don't think that's a word. Is it work? Those with masters and all that stuff, is that all right? You can tell I'm educated, right? Like, he's completely differentiated from the world. Like, because when the world is crying, we want violence, we want an eye for an eye, he says, turn the other cheek. When the world says, stone that adulterous woman, he says, those without sin, throw that first stone. In the world that says, don't drink with those people, they're just tax collectors, sinners, adulterous women, he says, I'll give you living water. Like, in a world that's constantly just curling in on itself in sin, he dies for you and me. And the God, the creator of everything, dies for all of us from the dead. And God raises him back up from the dead, raises him up to be the true judge. But that's not the best word. To be the true chieftain, or what we normally know it as, to be the true Lord, right? Who will bring us back to our Father's eyes, to our Father's gaze, as he brings us that life of that resurrection all around us. And he sets us apart to show the goodness of God in the world around us. And that's what I want you to see from this series, is that even though we find ourselves in the toilet bowl of life, just circling and circling and circling all around, is that God has called us into an existence. Like Peter talks about it in his work. He says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of this darkness into this wonderful light. Like this is who God has made you, not because of your own righteousness or anything like that, but it's because we have done whatever is right in our own eyes, just like those judges. But God, through Jesus, and even all the way back in the time of the judges, his people are not far from his own eyes. And for this pastor today, I think that's good news. And we'll end right there. And we'll pick up on the story of Ehud next week. It's got gross parts in it. You'll be into it, some of you. All right? Let's stand for a blessing. May God bless and keep all of you, that you would see that even though we've been selfish and that we've hurt people, that we've been selfish and only sought what is good for us, that we've been selfish and done just whatever is right in our own eyes, that God even loved us to the end, that God loves us and we are never far from his gaze. So may you continue to be blessed with comfort and know that God is always for you.